What's up, guys? You already know what this video is. We've somehow already found our way into the month of March. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to look back on all of those new releases that I saw in February. I think there's only 6 of them, and we're going to rank them and see how this month shakes out as a whole. If you like this type of content, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now, without further ado, let's get into this. We're going to start by talking about M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin. So I feel like a lot of people, myself included, have a pretty rocky and bumpy relationship with M. Night Shyamalan with his current slate of films over the past like 10 years. I mean, I don't absolutely hate the stuff he's been coming out with, but his shining moment for me was like 20 years ago at this point. You know, The Village, Signs, Unbreakable, those types of movies I absolutely loved from him, and he kind of solidified himself as like the king of the twist, basically. When you compare films like that to like The Last Airbender, you know, that movie isn't even allowed to be played in my household. If my future children want to watch that, they're going to have to go to a friend's house to do so, not under my roof. But like looking at Knock at the Cabin compared to those great movies he made a couple decades ago, I mean, it kind of just comes off as a little bit hollow. And I'll give it to him. I feel like the premise here is pretty cool. I know it was based off of a book. I haven't actually read it, but the setting is cool, and it really feels like it's just a drawn-out, long episode of The Twilight Zone, which obviously, massive fan of that series. I binged the entire thing while I was in college. Absolutely love it. So I dug that it kind of just felt like a long, extended tale of that. And then this movie starts off like it's shot out of a cannon. It really just jumps right into the meat and potatoes, and I was like, all right, let's do it. I'm ready for this thing to go up to the intensity of like level 11 at this point. And then it kind of just stays there, 20 minutes in, 30 minutes in, and so on and so forth, to the point that it kind of just finds itself comfortable at this like kind of bit of cruising altitude, and it just started to come off a little one note. The cast that's involved in this one is obviously super talented. I mean, you have people like Jonathan Groff, Rupert Grint, a bunch of others. They all do a really nice job in here. But Dave Bautista really steals the show. I think he does his best work as an actor yet in this movie. It's probably a pretty cold take at this point, but I've been saying it for a while now. Dave Bautista is the best wrestler turned actor we've ever gotten, and he proves with this movie that he can headline a movie, man. He can take it from start to finish, no problem. I think some of the themes that were explored in this movie were pretty effective for this storyline, like coincidences as a whole, conspiracy theories, the spread of misinformation. Those all worked really well with this storyline, but for whatever reason, I just didn't really feel the stakes with this one. Like, this is the apocalypse we're talking about. This is the end of the world. There shouldn't be a situation that's more high stakes than this one, and I just don't think the gravity of this whole scenario was properly portrayed on screen. There was also some unintentionally funny acting moments, like, that made me chuckle and just kind of took me out of the movie. I wasn't totally immersed, and for a movie and thriller like this one, that's not really a good sign. I think you can definitely have some fun with this one. It's kind of a more goofy M. Night Shyamalan entry. I just didn't really feel the intensity that I did from some of his previous entries. It just wasn't the M. Night Shyamalan home run I was hoping for, but it wasn't awful. I'm putting it in the fine category for February. Next, we're talking about The Outwaters. This is the newest indie horror movie that's sweeping the internet again right now. Everyone's saying this thing is all that in a bag of chips. So did this one really live up to the hype? I'm going to go with a resounding no from this one. I mean, if you remember Skinamarink from last month, this one is very similar to that. It's really going out of its way to be the next big, like, experimental and atmospheric horror experience, which I can definitely give props to. It's just this is not my cup of tea, like, at all. And everyone said this thing is, like, the most messed up movie they've seen in years at this point, all over TikTok, Twitter, everywhere on social media. So obviously I had to go check it out for myself. But to say I was skeptical would have been the biggest understatement of the century. And it seems like I was correct in feeling that way. So when this movie gets started, I mean, it takes a long time for it to actually get going. I feel like the first hour of this movie is just character introductions and setting the scene before we get any of the bloodshed or the crazy parts that actually got your butt into the seat in the first place. And so I was like, okay, I'm fine. I'm just gonna sit back and let this thing build. If this is as crazy as everyone's saying that it was, I'll happily let it do its thing until it gets to the, you know, meat and potatoes of this story pretty much. And then as it lingered on and on, I just kind of found the characters a little unlikable. The actual volume of the dialogue wasn't great, so you couldn't always hear what they were saying, and it just kind of stuck on this introduction for way too long, and it didn't really leave enough time for all of the crazy parts. Now, don't get me wrong, those crazy parts do happen at the conclusion of this movie, but this film is so frustrating. I feel like frustrating is the best word to describe it, because there is so much real estate left on the big screen, because the last 30 minutes, when all the crazy stuff is happening and all this cosmic horror and bloodshed is occurring, all we get to see is pretty much illuminated by a flashlight-sized pinhole on the big screen. Like the subject is 20 yards away, 90% of the screen is pitch black, you're just seeing what this flashlight can show us from like so far away that you really can't digest what's happening in front of you or even get a glimpse of what you're supposed to be looking at. To give this movie some props though, the sound design while all this is happening is top notch. It's some of the best sound design I've heard in a horror movie in a long time. But outside of that, I mean, I couldn't see any of the props. It looked like there was some pretty cool practical effects in there, but unfortunately, the only guy that's gonna know that for sure is the prop guy because they just didn't show me anything here. This is another example of a movie like Skinamarink that really just would have made an unbelievably killer, tight 30-minute short film, in and out, doesn't overstay its welcome, super effective. But instead, here we are with this feature-length film that I just don't think was ready for the masses. It's super messy and just left me super frustrated coming out of it. I just don't suggest this one. I'm never going to watch it again. Indie horror has been off to a little bit of a rocky start for me in 2023. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little upset about it. But this one is going to be going into the bad category for February. Next, we're talking about Sharper. And this is one of those movies where it's a little hard to talk about it without giving stuff away because this movie is all about con men and doing these cheap money-making schemes against like Manhattan's billionaires. So I won't talk about any of the specific plot points or anything like that. But man, I think I am addicted to these like stylish little thriller movies. They're just so much fun to watch, especially with a big crowd. They always keep you guessing and they're unpredictable. Maybe at the end, sometimes they can fall apart in the third act, but I mean, it doesn't really detract my enjoyment from them. They're just pure entertainment. And the cast in this movie is awesome. Julianne Moore, who I love. I don't think she's ever put out a bad performance in her entire career. Sebastian Stan continues to be addictively watchable in this movie. He's so good at playing like a manipulative little snake. It kind of reminded me of his performance in that movie Fresh last year, if you saw that one, which I also really enjoyed. But then you just throw in some extra performances by Justice Smith, John Lithgow, Brianna Middleton, who's someone that I'd never even seen before this movie, but I definitely want to see more of her after this. She's probably the character in this film I cared about the most after seeing the obstacles she needed to get past and kind of just how she persevered. But I mean, all the performances in here are really top notch, which obviously elevates this whole film. And going back to the stylish bit, the structure of the actual movie is very entertaining in itself. Each character is given their own designated segment in the movie to kind of see the background on all of these characters and how all of these people are going to eventually converge into this one main complex storyline. And looking back on it, I think that was actually a very good idea. Like after seeing the movie, if they had done the plot in a very linear and straightforward manner, it probably would have come off a lot more predictable. But doing it this way and scrambling it all up was a lot more fun. So my hat is off to whoever decided to do that. I will say though, I think there are some parts of this movie towards its conclusion where the film actually thinks it's smarter than it really is. And I feel like that kind of just comes with the territory when there's a movie about con men. It always wants to be the one that's going to fool the audience and really trick them and make them not know what's actually going to happen towards the end of the film. And I mean, even if I saw some of these twists coming down the pipe, it didn't really ruin my enjoyment of them. Overall, I thought this was just a really slick and enjoyable film, especially the first two acts really got me engaged and I was totally in there from start to finish. So I'm going to put Sharper as the first good movie in February. Next, we're talking about Your Place or Mine. What a shit show of epic proportions. And before I really rip into this one and just get labeled as a rom-com hater, I like a lot of different rom-coms. Silver Linings Playbook, Sleepless in Seattle, Midnight in Paris if you count that one, even though that's technically about a guy falling in love with the city, but I love that one. But if you give me a good quality script, some stars with actual chemistry, and a story that's gonna make me feel something, brother, I am there. But guess what? This movie has absolutely none of those. No one has any chemistry with anyone in this thing. The script is next level awful, and there are an insane amount of awkward silences. Like, there's no background music. It just feels so uncomfortable. And when there was music, we had like little 10-second spurts of it. I don't know if the budget wasn't there or what. And I think one of the biggest problems this movie has is that every single line is trying to be a joke or a gag. I don't know, it just kind of took any of the emotional stakes right out of the movie. It's just really hard to sympathize with the two main characters' situations in this because everything is set up to be a cheap gag. There's no emotion involved, nothing is taken seriously, and even when they have a shot at making something pretty dramatic, it's ruined with something cheap. And I feel like this movie was kind of doomed from the get-go because of the way that the story plays out. These two lead characters share the screen together very few times throughout the movie, so it's almost impossible to establish a connection between the two of them. Steve Zahn was really my saving grace in this one as the quirky gardener that hangs around for some reason. They must have just let him improvise all of his lines because I really thought he was the only character worth watching in this entire movie. But yeah, I mean, nothing interesting happens here. This is like watching paint dry. I couldn't believe that I was actually able to sit through this whole thing. It was a struggle. It was a struggle, but I did it, for better or for worse. I'm putting Your Place or Mine in the awful category for February. Next up, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and this is one of those movies that has just skyrocketed in anticipation for me after we learned that Marvel announced this is going to be the movie that introduces Phase 5. Obviously, that's for a couple of different reasons, one of them being that we're just out of Phase 4, thank God, just get us the hell out of there, but also because we get introduced to Kang the Conqueror, who's going to be the next big bad, the next Thanos of the MCU, especially if you didn't see one of his variants introduced in the first season of Loki. This is when you're meeting him for the first time. And also, it seemed like Ant-Man was just getting his first big adventure, which I feel like he was long overdue for. Did this movie deliver on all of those things? I mean, yes and no. If you like your sci-fi and you like it weird, you'll probably enjoy this movie more than most people will. I mean, this is probably the weirdest the MCU has ever gotten to date. There's a little bit of the Star Wars Cantina Band sprinkled in here, mixed with like Floops Fooglies from Spy Kids. If that's the kind of stuff you're into, I mean, there's a lot of gelatinous life forms and hybrid talking animals walking around the quantum realm. It really did a good job to make it feel like the island of misfit toys. I will say the CGI is definitely hit or miss in the movie, but it's one of the more goofy entries in the MCU, so the CGI being a little wonky wasn't really a total deal breaker for me. One thing I was super happy to see in this movie, though, was that they didn't just take Kang the Conqueror and transform him into some goddamn wisecracking stand-up comedian, which we've seen the MCU do in some of their recent films, just injecting way too much forced humor into these villain roles. I mean, Jonathan Majors just commands the screen in this movie. When he talks, everybody listens, and it's about time that we have another villain that just feels menacing and super powerful in the MCU. Now, I'm not saying that these cheap gags and forced humor aren't in here, though. Unfortunately, they take place the most at the expense of MODOK. And if you're a big MODOK fan, I mean, my heart goes out to you right now because he was done dirty in this movie. Now, I will say the way that he's portrayed in this film, he probably serves his purpose, but I mean, this is just not the character we know of from the comics. The character we know from the comics is super smart. I mean, that's why his head is so big. He has a massive brain, so I just don't think he would have fallen for some of the stuff he fell for in this movie. I mean, not a good look. Getting back to the performances, Michelle Pfeiffer and Jonathan Majors were the absolute MVPs of this movie. They were head and shoulders better than anyone else involved in this film. I really love the extra stuff they gave from their backstory too, because Janet was in that quantum realm for a long time, so it made sense that she would cross paths with Kang and kind of learn more about him and interact with him. All that backstory stuff they gave us, that was awesome. Those were by far the best scenes of this movie. Some of the other performances I wasn't too thrilled with. I mean, I don't think Paul Rudd and Catherine Newton had an awesome chemistry as father and daughter here. I just didn't really feel that emotional connection. Evangeline Lilly was barely in the movie. I don't think she had very many lines. I was a big fan of her growing up watching Lost, so that was a little disappointing to see. And then they clearly just didn't know what to do with Michael Douglas. Like, he was just like the bumbling old guy that they knew had to get dragged along for the ride, but I don't think they really had an arc or an end goal for him all that much. But yeah, at the end of the day, this one was definitely a mixed bag for me. I've been seeing some pretty intense reactions on both sides of the spectrum here with this movie. Some people absolutely love it. Some people are saying it's the worst thing the MCU has ever put out. I don't really agree with either of those opinions. I'm pretty split down the middle here. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, that's going in the fine category for February. The last movie we're talking about today is Cocaine Bear, and I'm sorry to say that if you didn't enjoy this movie, it's probably on you, because I don't think there's been a film in the last few years that has advertised itself so clearly in a what you see is what you get kind of fashion more than Cocaine Bear. I mean, you're buying a ticket to see this bear hopped up on drugs, make a meal out of everybody it sees on screen, and it delivers on that. It definitely delivers on that. And boy, did I have a good old-fashioned time at the movies with this one. I have to give some props to our director here, Elizabeth Banks, because she took a concept and scenario that could have easily been a one-trick pony and gotten stale within the first 15 minutes of the movie and found a way to expand upon it to make a pretty much entertaining movie from the beginning all the way to the end. There's a really nice level of physical comedy that's utilized in all of these wild scenes and scenarios with the bear killing and mauling everyone in sight. Like, I knew there'd be a lot of shock value with the bear and just thought it'd be kind of used in a cheap way for a quick laugh, but no, these sequences are very well constructed and they got the best laughs of the movie. I had tears in my eyes during this entire ambulance sequence. I can't wait to watch that again when it comes out on digital. I mean, that was probably the scene of the movie. But when I talk about a movie that's centered around such a simple, almost gimmick of a premise and really embodies that whole what you see is what you get notion, you know there's going to be some downfalls that come along with this thing. I mean, I already don't remember a single character's name. There are parts of the story that get sloppy as hell, and it really loses some steam in the third act, but all of that stuff aside, when this thing hits, it hits hard. I mean, like I said, I was crying laughing during a couple times in this movie. It's been a while since a comedy had that reaction from me. And those moments are a little few and far between, but they were definitely in there to a degree. Would this one be a totally different experience, and would I probably rate it lower if it went to streaming and I didn't see it with a fully packed live audience? Yeah, probably. But because I did see it that way, I had a blast with this one. Also, Margot Martindale steals the show. She is perfection in this movie every time she's on screen. This one is just big, dumb fun. The definition of a popcorn movie. I had a blast with it. Cocaine Bear is going in the good category for February. All right, we're done talking about all these new movies. Now it's time for me to just give my final rankings on them. Obviously, these first two are going to be very easy. There's no contenders or no opinions to go around here. Your place or mine, you're staying in the awful category. God, that is an abomination. The Outwaters is staying in the bad category. This experimental atmospheric horror stuff lately has just not been my cup of tea. When we move up to the fine category, I'm actually going to put Quantumania ahead of Knock at the Cabin. It was quirky and goofy. I enjoyed it. I really love the character of Ant-Man, especially that first movie, so I'm a little biased towards him, I think. Knock at the Cabin was fine. I don't know. It just doesn't have that same oomph that the usual M. Night Shyamalan movies did a couple decades ago that I really loved, so that's where that order's going there. I'm actually going to put Cocaine Bear in first here. I just had so much dumb fun with it. Sharper is just such a slick and well-constructed thriller. You should definitely check it out on Apple TV Plus if you haven't seen it yet. I just feel like not a lot of people knew it even came out. There wasn't a lot of advertising around it, so make sure you give that one a watch. But yeah, Cocaine Bear, that's taking my top spot for February movies. I mean, this is just such a good, dumb, fun experience in the theater. It was probably the most fun I've had in the movie theater in 2023 yet, so that's taking my top spot. All right, so that wraps up my tier list and ranking of all the new releases I saw in the month of February. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because I'm going to be doing a monthly wrap up every single month. And March is not one you're going to want to miss. I mean, we have Creed 3, John Wick 4, D&D, 65 with Adam Driver. The movies of 2023 are in full swing, baby. They're really picking up, and I'll see you guys at the next video.